Can you give the next slide, please? Next slide, please. To introduce the Covering Wisconsin speakers, first I'll introduce my colleague, Caroline Gomez-Tom. She will be presenting the majority of this presentation. She is our Enrollment Network and Accessibility Manager at Covering Wisconsin. I'm Tina Marshallek. I'm the Interim Community Relations Coordinator and a Health Insurance Navigator for Covering Wisconsin. I will be watching the Q&A and the chat throughout the session. Next slide, please. We are recording this and we will post the recording to Covering Wisconsin's website on the Assisters webpage. Next slide, please. Feel free to ask your questions anytime by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. When you move your mouse, you see the bottom of the screen that includes audio, video, participants, chat. There is also a Q&A button and you can ask your questions there. Please use that instead of the chat because it's easier for us to respond to you in real time. And with that, I will give it over to Caroline.
Thank you so much, Tina. And before we get started with the agenda and everything else that is included in today's presentation, I do want to offer a disclaimer just because immigration eligibility and really health insurance eligibility can be a point in time or accurate for when we're talking about it type of subject. So I want to make sure that today, I almost said December, October 15th, 2024, is the day that we are having this webinar, that this information is accurate as of October 15, 2024. And then if information changes, we will do our best to make sure that we share up-to-date resources, whether that's through Covering Wisconsin's website, through our listserv. And we encourage that you all join our listserv and stay connected so that you have the most up-to-date information regarding immigration eligibility and healthcare policy updates. I also will mention we do have two of our colleagues from the Department of Health Services who will help with the question and answer section at the very end to address specifically Medicaid specific questions. And that's Shannon Drake Burr and Maciel Gomez. All right, so we have a jam-packed agenda for today, and it will definitely cover a lot. And please know that this webinar is one that we try to do every couple of years, but it is not meant to be something that you absorb all at once and that you are now expert in. It is something that you can refer to, that you can go back and look at, that you can request assistance and reach out to Covering Wisconsin, because this information, like I mentioned, can change, but there are some takeaways that I think you will be able to move forward with. So we'll get through all of this today, but know that you don't have to observe every little thing and that you'll get these slides, whether it's through the recording or through a PDF moving forward. So first, I wanted to go through who we are. What is Covering Wisconsin? Why are we even talking about these issues? So Covering Wisconsin is a program out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, UW Extension, that helps people find and use health insurance. We are also the state's known healthcare navigator entity, which means we receive federal funding from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to help people sign up for health insurance for both Medicaid and the health insurance marketplace, and that we provide education like today's webinar, outreach, and promotions. So we have been around actually since 2003, but have been a navigator entity now since 2014. And we have expert navigators who are federally certified and state licensed to provide help around understanding health insurance. Questions can be big or small, but will help kind of get to the next place or the next answer, or look up how to go to the next step for any individual or person or employer or business. We really can help at least get you to the next stage, whether it's going through the full application process or just answering a question. We can help find plans and financial help. We can help folks sign up, as I mentioned, for healthcare.gov, Badger Care Plus, and Medicaid. And then we can help answer questions around billing, uh, really use of health insurance, um, understanding summary of benefits and things like that, and are a great resource in all 72 counties of the state. And then we create consumer tested materials. We provide trainings like today's webinar, and we have really fun outreach and marketing campaigns that we put forward during open enrollment and throughout the year to help promote both healthcare.gov coverage as well as Medicaid coverage. And I would be remiss to not mention what I do. I am the enrollment network manager. And so I help support our enrollment networks, which essentially are a place for our community partners to come together, share, and coordinate outreach and promotion strategies around healthcare. We also share policy updates. We also show and highlight trends that we're seeing on the ground. And then we're able to work collaboratively with our state agencies like the Department of Health Services and the Office of the Commissioner of Insurance to make sure that people are essentially equipped to help people sign up for health insurance. And so you see that we have our 8 regional enrollment networks, and then we have 2 community-specific enrollment networks, the Latina Enrollment Network and the Hmong Enrollment Network. And so these have been developed for some time now, originally from the start of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and now for the Medicaid unwinding period or the renewal process period, and now to help address any change in policies and community trends. And so we encourage you to enroll, sign up for your local enrollment network, as it's an opportunity to keep informed and stay connected to what's going on in your region of the state or in your specific community. And these are all of our enrollment network leads that host all of the various enrollment networks. And like I mentioned, I would love to have you all join your local enrollment network so that you get up-to-date information like this in real time as you participate in your either monthly or bi-monthly meeting. Okay, so now we get into the bread and butter of today's topic, which is immigration status eligibility for health insurance. And if you only have a moment to be on this webinar and can participate in, the takeaway, the 10-second takeaway of today, it is the golden rule of immigration status eligibility. And what that is that if someone is legally present, also lawfully present, we'll talk about that in a moment. If someone is lawfully present, they can qualify for health insurance. The one exception, the big exception, I should say, is tourist visas. But essentially, if someone has a way to verify that they are lawfully present in the United States, they should be able to qualify for some type of health insurance, period. Now you can write home and say, you can tell people this. This is the takeaway. And what this really is trying to promote, after all things are said and done, is that you encourage and try to help people sign up for insurance if they have any type of verification around an immigration status, because they will most likely qualify for something. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think we get caught up in the details of the rest of this presentation where we get nervous and we think, oh, I'm going to do something wrong. And there is no wrong. You can always apply for these programs. There's no harm in finding out that someone might not qualify for Medicaid, for example, or might not qualify for, their employer-sponsored insurance. But it is more important to actually try and get people connected to coverage than to not. And so what I'm saying here is that if someone is legally present, lawfully present, we'll talk about those definitions, they should apply. And so as I mentioned, the exception are tourist visas, and I wanted to throw that out there right up front just so that we can kind of move it to the side. So tourist visas, the reason that they are an exemption from the golden rule is that one of the conditions of getting a tourist visa is that they intend to return to their home country, which means that they cannot legally work in the United States and that they are not able to claim residency So, for example, residency here in Wisconsin, residency in the United States. So that's why this is the exception. All right, so now we're going to get into types of health insurance. We are going to focus on Medicaid and Marketplace really for this conversation, but really if someone has legal or current immigration status, they can qualify for some type of insurance. That starts the same list of coverage that we go through really with anybody. So when you're screening, when you're helping figure out what people might be eligible for, we go through the same employer-sponsored coverage or insurance from your job, Medicare, so someone with a disability or over the age of 65, Medicaid, Badger Care Plus, and then health insurance marketplace through healthcare.gov or cuidadodesalud.gov. So really, we're going through those same levels, but for today's discussion, we're really going to focus on eligibility around Badger Care Plus and healthcare.gov. And through our conversation, I want to continue to use the language that you're going to see during application processes when you're on the website, whether it's through access.wi.gov or healthcare.gov, the language that you use or that they'll use and you'll see. So first and foremost, for access for the state of Wisconsin, you're going to see the language lawfully residing immigrants. And we're going to use that today during today's topic. And lawfully residing immigrants has a broad or a very specific definition, but for today's purposes, what it really means is they are lawfully present, so they have a qualifying status that will allow them to seek assistance for the state of Wisconsin, and they're residing in Wisconsin, so they live in Wisconsin. So that's why that is particularly special for when we're talking about access and Medicaid. And then for healthcare.gov, they use the language a U.S. citizen, national, or be lawfully present. So this is the distinguishing language between lawfully residing, so specifically living in Wisconsin, and lawfully present, which is a more broader term used for healthcare.gov because they wanted to encompass really anyone living in the United States with that qualifying immigrant status. So when we look at the immigrant statuses for each of the programs, you'll see that there is overlap in terms of the statuses that qualify, but there may be more specific rules depending on the program that they're applying for. All right, so now we'll go into Medicaid program eligibility. So Medicaid or Badger Care Plus is the low cost coverage for people who have low income. It's also referred to as forward health or state insurance. We have an image of the forward health card, so people recognize, if someone has this card, that most likely means that they are currently enrolled in Medicaid or Badger Care Plus, and it's a program that's available all year long. There is no open enrollment period. People can sign up at any time and are encouraged to apply even if they're unsure if they qualify because the program itself will determine their eligibility. We should not be screening people out of signing up or trying to apply for Medicaid. When we talk about immigrants who are eligible or who qualify for Medicaid, they're qualified and lawfully residing. So there's that lawfully residing language again, immigrants. And these are the most common statuses that we'll see. So lawfully present permanent residents, or also known as green card holders, people who have been granted asylum, refugees, Cuban Haitian entrants, many Ukrainian humanitarian parolees. So there are some nuances there. That's why we said many. People who have been paroled for more than 1 year, Iraqi and Afghan special immigrant visa holders, battered spouse, children, and parents, victims of trafficking, members of federally recognized Indian tribe and American Indians born in Canada, citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, and people granted withholding of deportation. That does not include people with that status that are also DACA, just so you know. So DACA is kind of separate here. And this list is the most common list. The link here takes you to a more expanded list of folks. But one thing that I will also say is this is not something to memorize. This is not something that you have to memorize. This information will be here. It will be on this link that is attached. This is more so that you know where to go to kind of to start the process. But what we really want you to take away with is that you will apply and try when you have someone in front of you that has a qualifying lawfully residing status. And so I gave you the long list, but there are some specifics in terms of when someone with this qualifying lawfully residing status can qualify or sign up and essentially receive the benefits of Badger Care and Medicaid. And so some adults have a 5-year wait period when they can start receiving uh, Medicaid or Badger Care Plus benefits. And the folks that have that 5-year wait period are the battered spouse, children, and parents, victims of trafficking. And that's specific if they don't have a letter from the Health and Human Services uh, or Department of Health and, or I'm sorry, the Department of Homeland Security. Actually, I'm going to have Shannon put in the chat because now, since we wrote the acronym, I believe it's Homeland Security, but we'll verify. Um, And then lawful permanent residents, green card holders have to wait 5 years. And then if you're paroled for more than 1 year. And so everyone else of the other statuses that we shared do not have to wait the 5 years to qualify for Medicaid if they also qualify for the other rules around income and um, residency and such. So that is important because really this narrows down the list of folks that might have to go seek other health coverage. So really, it's a broader group of folks that actually can qualify for Medicaid based on their immigration status. And then additionally, there are some exemptions even in this group where they would not have to wait the 5 years. So if people arrived before August 22nd, 1996 into the country and they gain, let's say, permanent residency at a later date, they would not be subject to wait the 5 years to qualify for Medicaid just because they had already entered the country at this earlier date. And this is based on federal law. Okay, and I did get verification. HHS is Health and Human Services Office on Trafficking in Persons. Thank you so much, Shannon. I just wanted to be sure before I misspoke. And then another exemption that we'll discuss is if someone is connected to the military, whether it's through service or some other connection, and usually even if this question is brought up to the individual, they might like, oh yeah, I have some connection. That could also waive the 5-year wait period if they have a qualifying status and they're connected to the military. Some adults can get immediate coverage from emergency services, which we'll talk a little more about that later. And then pregnant people do not have to wait the 5 years. So even if they're an adult in these categories, if someone is pregnant, they do not have to wait 5 years. So Badger Care for children. Children aged 18 and younger who are lawfully residing with any status don't have a waiting period. They can access Badger Care and Medicaid as long as they qualify for the other eligibility factors around income, et cetera. And this is important because I think because of the 5-year wait period, people can get caught up in the different categories, but this one's an easy takeaway. Children qualify. If they are of, a lawfully residing status, they qualify, period. And it's always good to remind folks that children born in the US can be eligible for Badger Care Plus, even if their parents aren't eligible. So if they have undocumented parents, or if their parents are of a status that put them in the 5-year wait period or what have you, children who are US born can also still apply and become eligible. They don't need their parents to be eligible for them to qualify. And once children are enrolled, they are eligible for 12 months. And since January 2024, children under the age of 19 will get 12 months of continuous coverage when they apply for Badger Care Plus and Medicaid programs. So that means at the time that they apply and they're found eligible, they will get 12 straight months of coverage. And there are very limited reasons why those children would not no longer be eligible. They would have to either move out of the state, or their parents would have to call the Medicaid office and get them disenrolled. So for the most part, these children will stay covered for 12 months once they're found eligible, either at renewal time or at the time of application. And then children's enrollment for Badger Care Plus or any public benefit program will not negatively impact their parents' immigration status. We will talk more about public charge later on in the conversation, but this is a good takeaway that children are safe to use public benefits and it will not negatively impact their parents. All right, so this is highlighting some of the other Medicaid programs that we're familiar with that qualifying immigrants can apply for. Badger Care Plus, we've talked about quite a bit, but it also includes family planning only. So for reproductive health, Katie Beckett program, the Well Woman program, and then the Well Woman Medicaid. All of these programs are in the Medicaid umbrella that people with qualifying status, with lawfully residing status can enroll in. And yes, even for these programs, there may be, people subject to the 5-year wait that is in the reference slide before this, but it's always important to apply, apply, apply. We are not the determining factor if someone will become eligible for these programs. So even if you're unsure, it's safer to apply and see how it goes through the process to make sure that they get covered. It's also important to know that you have these references because if for some reason someone is not found eligible, it is worth calling the IM agency and maybe walking through this information with them to make sure that someone gets the coverage that they need. All right. For Medicaid for people ages 65 and older, qualifying immigrants, lawfully residing immigrants are eligible over the age of 65. If they are an adult with a disability, they can apply for elderly, blind, disabled Medicaid, the Medicaid Purchase Program, also known as MAP, Medicare savings programs, or also, referencing people who are dually eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid, and then institutional Medicaid and long-term care waiver programs. And then this is an important slide because this is also relevant to people with a refugee, asylee, or other protected immigration status. So if someone is entering the country with one of these statuses, then they will typically first apply for Medicaid or Badger Care Plus. However, if they are somehow receiving some kind of income, whether they're working and their income exceeds the Badger Care Medicaid eligibility, because of their status, they also can qualify for refugee Medicaid assistance or medical assistance. I apologize, misspoke. Refugee medical assistance. And they have a limited amount of time for them to enroll in refugee medical assistance. So it is important that if someone doesn't qualify for Medicaid because of their income, that they immediately apply for that refugee medical assistance so that they are covered up to those first 12 months after their day of entry. And so you can learn more information at this link. And then there's also a link to the list of the different types of immigrant statuses outside of refugee and asylee that really dig deep into who can qualify for the refugee medical assistance if their income is higher for Medicaid and Badger Care. There is a income threshold for refugee medical assistance as well, but it's still important for people to try and apply. Okay, so now we're going to get into programs for immigrants who are not eligible for Medicaid. So Badger Care Plus prenatal coverage is a program that's available to pregnant people, and in this case, who are undocumented. So if they meet the income limits, they are able to access benefits that apply to all medical services, including dental. It lasts until the end of the month when the pregnancy ends. And then people are eligible for 60 days of additional coverage, but they would have to inform their Medicaid office, their income maintenance office, that the pregnancy ended, and then they would allow for them to have emergency services for that 60-day window. It's not automatic, um, so the office does need to be informed. So it's important that people make that extra step at the time that the pregnancy ends. And then we've talked a little bit about it, but emergency services helps pay for serious healthcare emergencies for undocumented people and immigrants in that 5-year wait period. So this isn't for all undocumented folks because there are specific rules around eligibility here, but it's once again better to try and apply. And so we have populations like children 0 to 18, adults 65 and older, adults with disabilities, adults caring for children at home, and then pregnant women that could qualify for emergency services. Next, we'll get into healthcare.gov or cuidadodesalud.gov eligibility. So healthcare.gov, sometimes called the marketplace or the exchange, is the place where people can get private health insurance plans with financial assistance that is hosted by the federal government. And people can qualify for financial help based on their income. And then there's additional assistance right now because of some of the pandemic rules that go through 2025. So some people with even higher incomes can still qualify for financial assistance to lower the cost of their monthly premiums. And in some cases, based on income, can qualify for lower out-of-pocket costs, deductibles, co-payments, co-insurance. There is an open enrollment period for healthcare.gov that is November 1st through January 15th. So we're right on the anticipated period countdown as November 1st is sadly right around the corner. But it'll be important that you know this because this will be the time that people that may not have had the opportunity to enroll in coverage, but now because you newly know that they are eligible, you can get them signed up in this open enrollment period. And of course, there are special circumstances where people would qualify for a special enrollment period. Special enrollment periods pertaining to immigration is that if someone gains a new immigration status, so for example, if they maybe were undocumented, but because of some situation, they were able to gain a new status, they, at the time that they're gaining that new status, they would allow someone to sign up for healthcare.gov coverage. And usually it's a 60-day window from the date that that new status begins. So whether it's the date on the card or a letter that's received that's giving them pending status, all of that will allow them to then move forward with the application. And proof of verification is really key in if there needs to be some follow-up or verification from healthcare.gov. Not always, healthcare.gov doesn't always ask for additional information, but in case you need it, that verification, whether it's a letter, whether it's the document, immigration status document, and we'll actually have a resource later on in the presentation that shows you what are some of the examples of the immigration verification uh, uh, things that you'll need to verify on healthcare.gov. I go to that resource all the time, so I would suggest that you bookmark it when we get to that part. And then, of course, we want you to remember the golden rule. So if either of these questions are a yes, does this person have a qualified work authorization? Does this person have paperwork or documents that verify legal status? Then they most likely qualify for some type of health insurance coverage. And so we want to make sure that you are using this. And healthcare.gov is really the catch-all when employer coverage or sort of coverage from a job, Medicare, Medicaid, Badger Care don't work out because you tried and applied to all of those programs. Healthcare.gov is usually where people will land. So this is important to know that this is probably where people will qualify um, when you've gone through all of those different options. And this is the catch-all that I mentioned because this is a very robust list of immigration statuses where people can qualify for healthcare.gov coverage. And so you'll see that it is an expanded list from what we saw when we're looking at Medicaid eligibility. I'll highlight some of the unique ones to healthcare.gov. It expands to really various immigration types that have work visas. So H1, H2A, H2B, U visas, T visas, other visas that allow them to have work authorization. The temporary protected status, people deferred enforced departure, and deferred action status. This here does not include DACA eligibility, but we'll talk about that at another slide. Lawfully temporary resident and administrative order staying removal issued by the Department of Homeland Security. So once again, I'm not expecting you all to remember these. This is more of a catch-all reference tool that you can go back to and look when you have any questions. But the real takeaway, I know you're saying it with me, is to try and apply. That's the golden rule, is we're going to try and get people covered. And then this is like another little extra list of statuses that you would probably not have thought are eligible for healthcare.gov, but they are. So once again, the temporary protected status with employment authorization, the special immigrant juvenile status, here as well is the victim of trafficking visa. So as you remember, this was also on the Medicaid list, but you needed a letter to confirm that you were eligible to not have to wait the 5 years to qualify for benefits. If someone didn't have a letter and they were in that 5 year wait period for Medicaid, they would be able to come here, for example, and apply for healthcare.gov while they're waiting those 5 years or until they get their letter, for example. Adjustment to lawfully present resident status. So someone's transitioning to get their green card. Someone who has asylum status, but but it's specific if they have an employer authorization or are under the age of 14. And then someone withholding of deportation, withholding of removal under the immigration laws under the Convention Against Torture. So really, once again, you don't have to remember all of this, but it's good to know that this list is vast and we can get a lot of people covered if you try and apply. Okay, so this is our newest group of people that are now eligible for coverage, or they will be as of November 1st, 2024. Before I get into the full discussion of this group, um, one of the reasons that we included a disclaimer at the top, one, yes, this information is ever changing. Policy around healthcare, policy around immigration eligibility can vary, and we've seen this over different presidential administrations, around state policy, around local policy. Things can change. But right now, in particular, there is a court case that's at the federal appellate level where they are testing this DACA eligibility for healthcare.gov coverage. And the hearing is actually happening today, where they're hearing arguments around whether or not this is an allowable change by the federal government to include DACA as an eligible group. And we don't know if there will be a pause or a change or what have you. And so I want to just let you all know that that's happening. As we know it today on October 15, 2024, is that as of November 1st, they will be eligible for coverage through healthcare.gov. And so that's what we want to talk about today. And we will make sure that you are informed and updated if that changes. So once again, as of November 1st, people with DACA status will be able to sign up for healthcare.gov. And if they sign up, they actually can qualify for a special enrollment period. So this isn't limited to open enrollment in the sense that they don't have to wait for January 1st to start their coverage. If they apply by November 30th, they'll actually qualify for December 1st insurance. And then after December, or if they apply in December and after, then their coverage will start in 2025. But that is the law of the land as of today. And I know I've referred it to DACA. Some folks on this call know what DACA means, but if you don't, that's okay. DACA means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They're also known as Dreamers, and this is a program that temporarily grants some immigrants who arrived as children before the age of 16 permission to live and work in the US. And it must be renewed every 2 years, and it does not have a pathway to citizenship, but it allows people to work and it allows people to go to school. It allows people to serve in the military. And starting on November 1st, it'll allow them to have access to health insurance coverage. There are about 5,800 people that have DACA status here in Wisconsin, and this is based on the most recent report in 2023. 40% of our DACA community live in Milwaukee and Waukesha counties. 8 out of 10 work and nearly all pay taxes. And they are more likely to be uninsured because, as you can see, they didn't have access to other forms of coverage unless they were able to get coverage through their employer. Because of how the rules of DACA have been applied, and now there really aren't, there isn't a pathway for new enrollments of DACA or new applications of DACA, people are likely to be between the age of 22 and 43. So really, it's a very specific group of people in our state that will benefit from accessing healthcare starting on November 1st. There's a resource fact sheet, and then we also have created some outreach materials that are now included on our website at coveringwi.org/toolkit, where you can print English and Spanish flyers, postcards, etc., share easily on social media. And I really encourage that you help get the word out so that we can help those folks get access to coverage as soon as possible. We also created a DACA fact sheet for professionals in partnership with Kids Forward. And this is near finalization, but we wanted to give you a glimpse of what it'll look like. And once it's available, we'll make sure that this group in particular gets access to it. All right. So now that we got through really the general eligibility rules for both Medicaid and healthcare.gov, I did want to go through some healthcare.gov eligibility reminders just because they're a little more nuanced, a little more in the weeds, but still important and a good reference for when you want to come back and understand this stuff a little more clearly. Medicare is a program that we know that's generally for people 65 and older. And when or if someone is receiving disability income for at least 2 years, or they have end-stage renal disease. Medicare is often confused with Medicaid, but they are two different programs. And the reason that we emphasize this here is because immigrants can qualify for Medicare after the 5-year wait period. Yes, the 5-year wait can apply to Medicare as well, but they would have to meet a work requirement or work credit requirement to get premium-free Medicare Part A. So that means they would have to have worked in the United States for 10 years with typically with a qualifying status because those 10 years would have had to count. It's not something that counts if you don't have a qualifying status. Um, and if they, don't qualify for the premium free Medicare, the likelihood is they probably can't afford it. So it's really important that we know that low income immigrants on healthcare.gov can qualify for financial assistance even if they're below 100% of the federal poverty level. And so that applies to people who don't qualify for Medicaid or Badger Care Plus or don't qualify for premium-free Medicare Part A. And this one is always a good thing to highlight because people assume that when someone is over the age of 65, that, oh, well, you should be on Medicare. And that's just not the case. We know that we're not supposed to sign people up for healthcare.gov if they qualify for premium free Medicare, but this is the exception. If they don't qualify for premium free Medicare, then we can get them into healthcare.gov. And if they are below 100% of the federal poverty level and they don't qualify for Medicaid, we can get them in there. And what that means is that they can end up paying $0 for their monthly premium and have very affordable health coverage with very low out of pocket costs. And this is just a quick chart, just so that people understand what the eligibility for financial assistance looks like. So for folks who are very low income, they will most likely qualify for $0 plans with even more savings if they pick a silver level plan. And this is once again for immigrants who don't qualify for Medicaid and or premium free Medicare and they're low income. And then for folks that are of moderate income, so between 101 to 250% of the federal poverty level, they will qualify for some financial assistance and lower costs if they pick a silver level plan. Middle income, the silver plan cost sharing does not take place, but they still can get financial assistance to lower their monthly premium. And then for people with higher income above 400% of the federal poverty level, they can qualify still for financial assistance because of that policy change during the pandemic where people can qualify for uh, financial assistance even if they're above that 400% of the federal poverty level. It does depend on what the cost of the health plan would be compared to their household income. And so it's not that every single person will qualify, but most people will. And it's, of course, good to try and apply. This applies here too, because we're in the business of trying to get people covered. Another good healthcare.gov reminder is that when you are enrolling and you have access to financial assistance or premium tax credits, the person applying has to state and has to agree to filing taxes. And this can get complicated, especially with people with varying immigration statuses, because depending on their immigrant status, they may be required to file a certain way. And so it's good to know what those what those issues may be. So to qualify for premium tax credits, a person must be able to file taxes independently without someone else claiming them as a dependent. And then they have to file taxes married, filing jointly, head of household, or single. So they won't qualify for financial assistance if they're married, filing separately. But there are some exceptions to this if they're a victim of domestic abuse or spousal abandonment, where then they would be able to change, they wouldn't have to file married um, separately or married jointly. They would be able to essentially claim themselves as a single or head of household. So I'm linking to those exceptions here because what? You do not have to memorize this. This is a reference tool that you can come back to so that you know what you're talking about. But once again, we want to try and apply. And then as a reminder, even if someone is in a sponsorship situation, marketplace tax credits are not a public benefit. So there is really no worry in regards to public charge and any of those issues when we're talking about healthcare.gov. All right, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about some other programs because there are other programs outside of healthcare that are also important to anybody, but also folks in the immigrant community. So food share is one of them. So we wanted to make sure that people knew that there are some folks that are eligible for food share. This link specifically is a source that, is a source that has a more robust list of people who would be eligible for food share. But the big takeaway is that food share, family planning, childcare, W-2 cash assistance can be applied for at the same time as Badger Care Plus. And there is nothing wrong with applying to figure out if you're eligible. Because once again, we do not determine eligibility, the state does. So we encourage enrollment assisters to help people apply for these programs. For more information about the immigrant eligibility for any of these programs, we have linked them here because this is a reference tool. I know might be getting old, but someone will have an aha moment, say, a reference tool, I have this. And we'll come back and look through these slides and this video at a later date. And then another program that isn't specifically on the access.wi.gov application is the WIC program. So this is the supplemental program for women, infants, and children. And there is really no eligibility requirement for immigration status for this program. So we really encourage people to look at this program as a resource for someone who is either pregnant or for someone who is caring for children under the age of 5 or who is breastfeeding. And if someone is already enrolled in Badger Care Plus or Food Share, they are likely to qualify for WIC. So once again, another great resource for you to consider as you're talking with folks from the immigrant community. And then now I want to get into some resources for people with an undocumented immigration status. This whole presentation prior to this really has focused in on lawfully present or lawfully residing immigrant statuses, but there are few folks, really not a few, there are many folks that unfortunately do not have access to these statuses and in many cases have lived in our country for a very long time and have really limited resources in terms of access to certain benefits, which really is a detriment not just to us, but to public health in general. So I want to make sure that people still know that there are resources available, even if they're not as robust as the benefits that we just talked about earlier in this presentation, but I still want to make sure that people have access to them. So for example, people can access community health centers, so federally qualified health centers, and free and charitable clinics available across the state of Wisconsin. And specifically, both of these types of health centers and clinics cannot turn people away regardless of immigration status. So that means they have to be served. And so this is important to know. We can also get folks connected to community and charity care programs at their local health systems. So if someone goes to their local hospital, each of them have programs that will allow for people to qualify based on their income and other factors to help pay for certain healthcare costs. It may be different from health system to hospital to, but it's still important that we know what they are and what they are locally to you so that we can help folks through that process. Badger Care prenatal program for pregnant women. We talked about it earlier, but that program still exists for undocumented pregnant people. And so it's important that we remind folks that that is a resource. And then, of course, the emergency services program that we talked about earlier as well, that is still available for most children and adults. Okay. And then public charge. is a charged topic. I want to get into this, but I also don't want to really get people concerned about it because we're actually in a really good place right now with public charge because we are back to old rules prior to anything being changed, which essentially means that if someone has a qualifying lawful status, they can qualify for some type of coverage. And really, Badger Care Plus, healthcare.gov, all of the benefits that we talked about, housing, food, healthcare, are safe. That's the takeaway. And enrolling in these programs does not make someone a public charge and does not hurt their immigration status. There is one exception. So if someone has long-term care that's paid, that is an institution paid for by Medicaid or Badger Care Plus, that would be considered uh, in a public charge test. So that doesn't mean that they would no longer be able to change their immigration status, but it would be considered. This is the only exception, is that long-term care paid for by Medicaid or Badger Care Plus. And and so everything and anything else that we've talked about today would not be subject to a public charge test and are safe for people to use. So that means we want people to try and apply. And even if there was concern, trying and applying does not mean that they would be found eligible if for some reason they weren't eligible for that program. The state of Wisconsin determines eligibility, so we want to encourage people to apply. We do have resources that help walk through some of this information, and you can also use to share on social media, and that's at immigrantbenefitswi.org. You can get to this website directly or through Covering Wisconsin's website. All right, so now we're going to go over some fun, helpful tips and resources that, once again, is for your reference, so you can always come back and look through this. The first and foremost one that I hope everyone knows here today is that Covering Wisconsin is here to help. We know that this is not something that people will have memorized, that will be fully absorbed. And so please do not hesitate as an enrollment assister, as a professional, as someone who needs this type of assistance to reach out, whether it's finding us online and booking an appointment at coveringwi.org/enroll or coveringwi.org/enroll Spanish, or calling us directly. We have a wonderful a representative who answers for us and will help set up appointments or get you connected to a navigator that can help answer your question. You can also call 211 at any point of the day, anywhere in the state, and they will also make referrals to us directly. And then you can also text us, or not text us. Oh, yes, it is text as well, but chat with us on our website at coveringwi.org, and you will talk to a live navigator from 9 o'clock in the morning to 4:30 on regular business days. And then if you are after hours, someone will get back to you by the next business day. One other tip that I want to make sure that people are aware of is that when someone becomes a citizen, it is really important that they update their information with the Social Security Administration. And the reason that is because when that is not up to date in their system, it can slow down the ability for someone to get a job, to collect Social Security benefits, to receive other government services, because all of those systems are communicating with one another to verify eligibility. So really, when you are working with someone who just became a new citizen, congratulate them and then make sure that they went through this step. And once again, even if they're sharing this information to verify citizenship, it is only to determine eligibility for coverage. So it's not for any negative purposes. And so these are some of the systems that updating your citizenship status with Social Security would include like the Social Security Administration, Department of Homeland Security, and then the systematic alien verification for entitlements uh, databases. One of my favorite resources that I did mention earlier, but now here is a dedicated page for it, is the Health Reform Beyond the Basics. They have a fantastic tool that, once again, I have gold starred and bookmarked on all of my browsers. Yes, all of my browsers, not just one of them, all of them, because for some reason I use multiple browsers sometimes. I like to switch it up. This tool is great because one, it goes through all of the different eligible statuses that people can qualify for in terms of coverage, and it walks through what verification people look for or the systems look for when you're applying for healthcare.gov. So if you're not sure where to find the numbers that you need on a green card or on a work permit, work authorization, you can go here and you can figure out where exactly you're looking for those specific numbers when you're entering it in healthcare.gov. Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay. An additional resource is legal services for immigrants. So this is a tool that's also found on the immigrant, um, or yeah, Wisconsin Collaboration on Immigrants and Public Benefits site, which is the immigration benefits wi.org. And this tool is actually in the process of being updated because we have more free and low cost services that we want to include, which is great. And I want to make sure that you all have access to this because in many cases, when someone is enrolling for benefits, there may be other resources and services that they also need access to. And this might be a great connection to make for individuals that might not already have a connection with legal services around immigration. These are just some additional resources: the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project, the National Immigration Law Center. Healthcare.gov has some good information too, and all of these are linked to their immigrant specific pages. And then, as I mentioned, Health Reform Beyond the Basics. And then we talked a little bit specifically about refugee community. There are some wonderful refugee resettlement agencies across Wisconsin that help people with refugee, asylee, and other protected statuses referenced earlier in the presentation. And so I wanted to make sure that people had knowledge about where those locations were and where you can reach out for assistance if needed for those specific populations. And then before we are, oh, before we're done, I do want to ask everyone to complete the evaluation for today's webinar. I will throw it in the chat as well as you'll get a email after the presentation with this information. Your feedback is what allows us to do these presentations and to make sure that we are providing content that benefits you, because we don't want to talk to a wall. We want to make sure we're talking to people doing the work on the ground. So please, please, please provide us this feedback on how this information will either help or not help your day-to-day lives. And then these are some of the references that I made throughout today's presentation and where I got some of this information. And I think we are now in the question and answer section.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you to everybody who has been sending questions in the chat. It has definitely kept Shannon and me busy throughout the webinar. I appreciate all the engagement. There is one question that has come up a couple times, Caroline. What about people who are in the process of applying for asylum? So they have not received asylee status yet.
Yes. So, and it depends on what program you're talking about, because it can vary between Medicaid and healthcare.gov. But if someone is in the process of seeking asylee status and they are given a work authorization, then they are able to apply for healthcare.gov. If there's a letter that goes along with the asylee status that it's pending, that too can also allow for them to qualify through healthcare.gov. So it's important, once again, that if they have some form of verification that we're going through uh, that process. Shannon might want to add in terms of how this would apply for Medicaid, but healthcare.gov is absolutely the catch-all here.
Yeah, I'll add for pregnant people and children. So if you have a pregnant person and they have been granted employment authorization, they should apply for Badger Care Plus. I would start with that door. If you have a child, um, there is this age 14 concept, which is a little bit confusing, but I'll do my best to describe it. So if you have a child who is less than 14, if their asylum application has been pending for 180 days or more, then they may be eligible for Badger Care Plus or Medicaid. If it's been pending for less than 180 days, post November 1st, under the new rules, they should be able to apply and receive marketplace coverage. So that's kind of a fine distinction and a little bit confusing. But, to the point Caroline has been hitting on here, apply. So really between the marketplace and Medicaid, think of it as a no wrong door, right? If you go to one and you should have gone through the other, they will let you know. And then you just need to assist that person in doing the other application. So if you're not sure, start with Badger Care Plus or Medicaid, and they'll let you know, and they will do a referral to the marketplace if that's the more appropriate place for that person to apply for healthcare coverage. There was one more thing I was going to say about asylum, and I have forgotten what it was. So if you are left with a lingering, more detailed asylum application for asylum question, put it in chat and I'll try to judge back up what in my memory I'm missing here.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. There's a specific scenario question here that I might respond to, but there are some questions embedded into it that I'll ask about. So if a family received asylum status 5 to 6 years ago and they're a higher income family, do they still qualify for Medicaid, or are there still income requirements for people with asylum status?
We try not to get into specific scenario questions because it's so hard to know what is actually going on. So I'm just gonna punt that one.
Well, and I think what we can say is we can bring that one to the side if they want to specifically reach out to us. But they can still apply to figure out if they qualify going through Access or calling their local IM agency office. But it'll be based off their specific scenario whether or not they qualify and are determined eligible.
Yeah, and to the part of the question that doesn't it depend on their status now? Yeah, their status now is going to be relevant, but sometimes when you what you might think you understand about somebody's situation, it's more nuanced than it really is. So,
Sure. Does anyone know if undocumented individuals can qualify for a spouse's employer plan?
So this is also a complicated question. So it depends on what is required in terms of what is shared with the employer, and also what type of, because sometimes when you're applying for benefits through an employer, they still require a social security number. Is that social security number valid? There's a lot of other questions. So it's not a yes or no, it's a maybe, and it definitely depends case by case. So once again, a good rule of thumb is if you're not sure, you could reach out to Covering Wisconsin and we can help kind of identify some of those challenges. It's also an opportunity to look deeper at, the requirements of that HR and of that program.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asked, when you say healthcare.gov, is that marketplace? Yes. We say healthcare.gov because unfortunately there are many health insurance scams out there. And when we say marketplace, there are some people who say marketplace and are masquerading as the real federal health insurance marketplace. When we say healthcare.gov, then you know that you are at the right place. You are on the correct website. So that is the website for the federal health insurance marketplace is healthcare.gov. Oh my goodness, so many questions. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up.
No, and you're good, Tina. And then the Spanish version, as I mentioned earlier, is cuidadodesalud.gov if you're helping Spanish-speaking consumers. So that's their version of healthcare.gov. But those are the two official sites.
Someone asks if you have specific scenario questions after today's webinar, can you reach out to Covering Wisconsin to ask, or is it best to call the Income Maintenance Agency or the Marketplace? Yes, you can, of course, reach out to Covering Wisconsin. Know that we are not the state of Wisconsin, though. And so if you need something like to see whether your fax was received for Badger Care, we wouldn't have access to that information. So there are some things that it makes more sense to call the Income Maintenance Agency or the Marketplace for, but we can also help get you to the right place if you're not sure who the correct group is to contact. I'll go over a couple questions that came up that we already answered that I know are frequently asked questions. Somebody asked if a parent is undocumented and the child is documented, if the parent is putting themselves at any kind of risk by applying for health insurance for the child. The answer is no. They only need to provide their immigration status information for the people who are applying for coverage. So if they are only applying for their child, only the child's immigration status needs to be disclosed. Someone also asked if a question about Medicare, whether somebody can qualify for Medicare with just work authorization or something to that effect. Caroline also covered this in the presentation, but with it being the dense thing that it is, I'll explain again that technically, yes, they can qualify for Medicare, but depending on how many work credits they have, they may not qualify to get Medicare Part A without having to pay a premium. And if they do have to pay a premium for Medicare Part A, then Medicare can be very expensive. So someone in that scenario can sign up on healthcare.gov instead, even if they're over 65. I would reach out to Covering Wisconsin if you find yourself in a situation like that or someone in a situation like that, because we can help them sign up on healthcare.gov. Does healthcare.gov accurately refer to Medicaid considering state rules for immigrants who are eligible? I'm not exactly sure what Julia meant by that question. If you want to add more context to it in the chat. Are families coming with asylum eligible for MA? If so, does this affect their process with getting their residency in the US?
So, well, Carolyn, I'm sorry. I didn't need to jump in
No,
there.
they said the magic MA, so you're
Okay.
free to go for it.
So I think maybe there's an important immigration concept that we should just touch on briefly here is that when people are outside of the United States, and they're applying to come in because of a urgent because of a humanitarian crisis, often those are going to be the folks that we call refugees, and they go through specific doors when they are external to the United States. So when they are outside the borders, they apply for refugee status, and many folks end up waiting in refugee camps for years upon years before they're allowed to enter the United States as a refugee. When you apply for asylum, you are already in the United States. So you are inside the borders and applying for asylum because you have a well-founded fear of persecution should you return to your country. So this question is a little confusing because people don't arrive into the United States with asylum. So I don't know if that sort of very basic, just refugee versus asylee understanding is at all helpful. But if you could think about that and maybe try your question again, I can see if I can give you a better answer.
Okay, thank you. Shannon, there's a question by Michelle Velasquez. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name in the chat that I am wondering if you may have an answer to. There is also a term in there that I'm not sure how to pronounce, and I'm worried I'm going to butcher it if you're able to find it. Someone also asked if there are any legal services for immigrants in La Crosse County. I'm sure that there are. You may want to call 211 and ask for resources in that area. And someone else mentioned that for resources in La Crosse County that you may want to reach out to Catholic Charities.
Okay, so Tina, you asked about the battered spouses question from Michelle.
Yes.
Is that the one? With the prima facie determination letter. I'm not even sure that I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a pretty nuanced one that I'm gonna bring back, Michelle, and get back to you on. I do not get this question often, so I need to do a little research. I understand what you're asking. I just need to do a little due diligence on it.
Okay, we will take that one back. Thank you. So Julia clarified her question. The question was, does healthcare.gov accurately refer to Medicaid considering state rules for immigrants who are eligible? And she said, here's an example. Ukrainian parolees qualify for Medicaid within the 5-year bar. If a person applied for coverage on healthcare.gov, would they be sent to Medicaid for consideration of Medicaid, or would it mistakenly grant premium tax credits for a marketplace plan?
So Julia has heard me say this before, so this is not news to Julia, but it might help folks on the call as well, on the webinar, that technically policy purposes in terms of how healthcare.gov is supposed to function is that yes, if the rules would point this person to Medicaid, it should send them to Medicaid for determination. Does that always happen? The reality of policy does not always equal the text of policy. Policy does not equal what actually we see. So it's important as enrollment assisters that we are monitoring that, figuring out if we are going through healthcare.gov and we think this person should actually get a Medicaid determination, but it's not automatic. One, we could try and go through access to start, which is not a bad rule of thumb, is if you think they might qualify for Medicaid to start there. But two, if you are going through healthcare.gov and you just want to double check, there is a box that's in the eligibility notice. So when you're about to go through the premium tax credit part, where it also says, do you want to send this information to Medicaid for eligibility? And so by checking that box, it starts that process even if it wasn't automatic. And that's another way to kind of cross your T's and dot your I's if you're just not sure.
Yeah, the other thing I think might be helpful to say about Ukrainian humanitarian parolees specifically. And there have been a number of parolee questions in the chat too, so I think just sort of broadly addressing parolees might be helpful. So specific to Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, they do have a special benefits eligibility status that was granted to them by an act of Congress. But there are some specific dates around that, and we have seen those dates get bumped out, but sometimes belatedly. So the last end date for that eligibility that we have is September 30th of this year, so 2024. And that had gotten extended from September 30th of 2023 for Medicaid eligibility. So if you're the primary Ukrainian humanitarian parolee, the rules for Medicaid are that you have to have arrived on or before September 30th of 2024. Now, you might have a child or a spouse who's coming in after that September 30th, 2024 date, and they may still be eligible for Medicaid, even though they arrived after the September 30th, 2024 date. But if you're the only person in your family who's come and you're now arriving, now we're beyond that September 30th, 2024 date. So you may not be eligible for Medicaid because of your parolees, because of the date you arrived, or were granted parole. Now you can and should apply for marketplace coverage. So this is it gets really complicated with parolees, especially because we have some special parolees because of acts of Congress. It also, as you saw in an earlier slide, eligibility for Medicaid looks at your length of parole. So have you been paroled in for at least a year or not? That matters if you're an adult applicant to the Medicaid or Badger Care Plus program. And then there's an additional layer where we have many people who are from Cuba or Haiti who are parolees. And in that circumstance, if they are something that we call a Cuban Haitian entrant, which isn't an immigration status per se, it's actually a public benefits eligibility status. It's a very confusing one. Many Cuban Haitian entrants are parolees, then you may be eligible for Badger Care Plus or Medicaid, regardless of your length of parole or when you arrived. So if you have somebody before you who comes from Cuba or Haiti, and they are a low-income individual, like I encourage you to always go through the Medicaid Badger Care Plus door first. Test that door first and see if it works in terms of obtaining health insurance.
Thanks, Shannon. Somebody asked if you can elaborate on the differences between a parolee versus an immigrant versus a refugee.
We want a semantics lesson, huh?
Yes. Semantics.
I'm trying to think of what is meaningful to say here. So I suppose in common language, we might refer to all of these folks as immigrants, right? Refugee is a distinct status. And like we talked about before, refugees apply for that status when they are outside the borders of the United States. People who are paroled in, I don't want to say too much because I am not. This is a immigration law question. This is not a healthcare eligibility question. But my understanding of parole is people are generally granted that status as they're coming into the United States. So on their I-94, you will see paroled in, and then it'll give a length of time for people who are parolees. Now, there may be other ways. I know people can renew parole. I don't know all the details of that, but that is generally how I see it, is upon their entry.
Sure. So I think the way that I may think of it as simplistically as I can is that parolees and refugees are immigrants. Not all immigrants are parolees or refugees, I think.
Yes.
Yes, great. And I think that parolee is often used as a replacement for refugee. Sometimes.
I mean, they're not interchangeable. I think that's an important thing to say. Like,
okay, there we go.
If they do get used that way, that isn't correct. And then I just wanted to elaborate that parolee, it's not an immigration status in the same way refugee is. It's temporary permission to reside in the US and apply for employment authorization. But there are a few types of parolees who are eligible for refugee benefits, which I think is maybe where it gets confusing. And that's because of specific acts of Congress. Like I just talked about, that could include the Cuban Haitian entrants, the Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, and then previously the Afghan humanitarian parolees. So maybe that's where the confusion between parolee and refugee comes in, is this eligibility for benefits through the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Okay, thank you. Someone had asked a question earlier that Shannon responded to, saying DHS can take it back. It was asking if cancer is considered to be a qualifying expense for emergency services if someone's undocumented. Someone asked if this could be added to that list under things that could be considered emergency services eligible if an undocumented person who has diabetes goes to the ER and has a diabetic event. So I can type that we can add that to the list of things to be taken back.
Okay. Yep. Let's add that to that list.
Okay. And someone sent a resource for a volunteer legal clinic in Milwaukee at the United Community Center in Milwaukee on Wednesday evenings. The link is in the Q&A. Why are DACA recipients not eligible for Medicaid?
So I can take that one. And that one is definitely, there's baggage there. This deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA eligibility, has just been definitely an overly politicized one. As we are, coming up to an election, we have heard DACA and just immigrants in general as a talking point for, all of these different various political races. And when the federal government was determining how to adjust the policy to include DACA eligible folks to healthcare.gov, they also intended to include Medicaid, but because of, you know, feedback that they received during the time of uh, the rule public comment, they ended up making a decision to not include Medicaid at this time and put forward the healthcare.gov eligibility that will start on November 1st. As you heard me mention earlier, that there is a court case. This is also one of those things where, because it's so politically charged, there are people that are trying to even limit and stop um, this healthcare.gov eligibility for people with DACA status. So, um, in terms of when we look at qualifying lawfully residing status, DACA technically would fit that eligibility. However, because of what the federal government says we can and cannot include, we are limited. So that's kind of where things stand right now.
Thank you. I'm not sure that we will have an answer for this distinction that was asked, but I will ask it for the good of the cause. Someone asked whether a parolee would be different from someone who comes into the US and is allowed entry but was detained and comes with detention records. Not sure.
That
I
one
don't
might,
think we can answer that.
yeah, I think that one might be a little more complex, but we can always say try and apply.
Yes, try and apply. Um, with our expertise being in health insurance eligibility, sometimes these immigration questions are a little outside our wheelhouse. But thank you for asking your question.
Well, and this also goes to, by reaching out to Covering Wisconsin, that's where we will do the work to try and figure out. So, whether that's getting connected to some of these legal resources, whether it's, asking some more follow-up clarifying questions. So please know that you're not alone in trying to figure that out. Just this isn't the venue for it.
Sure. If immigrants are given ITIN allowing them to work in the US, so they have work authorization, would they then qualify for Marketplace?
So ITIN number alone isn't a verification that is allowed on healthcare.gov. But if someone has a work authorization that goes along with their ITIN, then yes.
Okay,
So, um, but once again, we can talk through that if you have a specific case. I'm happy to help where I can.
sounds good. And the only item currently remaining in the FAQ is the resource of the FQHC list for those who were looking for federally qualified health centers in their area. Any other questions? We have 3 minutes if you want to send them through the Q&A.
And I'll include that in the everyone chat. I did include the evaluation in the everyone chat. So please, if you have a moment to do the evaluation as we are about to close this webinar, I would really appreciate it. If you're not able to do it right in this moment, then please follow up with the email that we'll send later on. And thank you for your interest and consideration on this topic because it's an important one. And really the goal of this is to make sure that we are helping people apply for coverage and that more cases than not, someone will be eligible for health coverage.
Someone did ask a question earlier that I'll bring back up because it's a frequently asked question. They had asked if interpretation services are available through Covering Wisconsin for callers who may speak a unique language or a language that is less commonly spoken in the United States. The answer is yes, absolutely. Interpretation services are available for free with Covering Wisconsin for whatever language the consumer speaks.
And with more languages that may be harder to get access to, we will try to do our best in real time to find an interpreter, but may need to set an appointment at a later date to make sure that we have someone that is able to speak that language.
So I have a phone a friend here. And so this question about parolees being different than patients who come into the United States and are allowed entry, but were detained and come with detention records. I want to be really careful here. I don't think we're going to be able to fully answer your question, but maybe just put this caveat out there that someone could, they could, I think, have both these things. Like they could both be a parolee and so they could be in removal proceedings and have been granted a period of parole. So maybe that's the follow-up question to ask somebody who's, before you with this. Or to the greater advice here, which is apply with them, like don't just assume that they're not going to be eligible for anything. Do an application.
Great. Okay, there are a couple of messages coming in just saying thank you. You're more than welcome. Thank you for coming. We very much appreciate everybody's participation in this webinar. And we are 1 minute at time, so with no other questions coming in, I think we can say thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.